Hey, what's up guys? So this is another web technology informational video tutorial series on how to build a REST API on PHP. Now let's go to the details of what is an API. So basically an API stands for Application Program Interface. So application program interface, and that's a very broad term. So there's all kinds of API, but we're specifically talking about web API here. So there's an API in your smartphones or even in your refrigerators. And so this is a very generalized, but essentially an API is a contract provided by one piece of software to another piece of software, and it usually consists of structured request and then a structured response. So one piece of software, it says, give me this kind of information or this information formatted in this way, and I'll give you this data or this function or whatever that response may be. So in order for us to better understand what an API is, so let's have a look on the analogy that I provided here of what is an API. So this is the analogy that we have here. So we have customers sitting on the table. So consider this customers as a client or web application, and then the kitchen is the server or the service that process certain requests. Well, the waiter is like an API. So it is formatted to take a certain order in a specific way and then bring back a certain meal, and this would be the data or the response that you requested. So an API is basically a messenger or a waiter between running software. Think of this as the connection between the client or the requesting client and the server. So this is the API at the center, providing a way of communication between two software. So now let's talk about REST. Okay, so basically it is a representational state transfer, and it is an architecture style for designing network applications. So it relies on stateless client-server protocol, which is HTTP, and you're quite familiar with HTTP, right? So it treats server objects as resources that can be created or destroyed and can be used by virtually any programming languages. So REST can be used by JavaScript, PHP, Python, C#, and other languages that are available today. So HTTP has different methods or methods that are being used. So we have this methods. Number one is to get. So the purpose of this is to retrieve data from a specified resource. We also have post, meaning we submit data to be processed to a specified resource. And get and post, basically these are the two methods that are basically used on a form, get and post. And then we also have this put. So the put method is an update to a specified resource. And also we have the delete. So delete a specified resource. And then we also have this three other methods, which is head, options, and patch, but we're not going to go into details on these three. So we will be familiarizing only the get, post, put, and delete. So now we're going to look at some of the endpoints or example endpoints. So this is the URI or URL where our API or service can be accessed by a client application. So this is just an example on how the endpoint works. So we have get. So get and then the URL or the URI that the API or service can be accessed. So anyway, we can always choose a directory instead of by using API. We can have always the option to use different directories. For example, API access, it depends on your preference. We also have get and then specify the ID, and then we also have post. So as you can see, post and get have can have different or have the same URI, but we don't have to worry about that because we specify the post or the get, which is the method to use. So it doesn't matter if they have different or they have the same URI that we're using. Then we have put, and then this is the example URI specifying the ID, and of course the delete. The same thing with get, put, and delete. They have the same URI being used, but different methods: get, put, and delete. Now let's try to have a look on how to set up our PHP REST project. So I'm going to show you how to properly arrange or configure your REST project. So for the purpose of this video tutorial series, I'm going to use WAMP server. So it is consisting of Apache, PHP, MySQL, and MariaDB. So it is a Windows web development environment, and if you want to use WAMP server, you can go ahead and download WAMP server and install it on your local development machine. So actually you can also use other server that you want or you prefer. So you can use LAMP, SAMP, or other versions of this server. So we will also use PDO or PHP data objects. So it is basically an extension that will provide us consistent interface for accessing databases in PHP. It will be helpful for us to use PHP data objects. Okay. And also I'm going to use for our code editor, I'm going to use Visual Code or Visual Studio Code as our primary code editor. And it is open source and can be run everywhere. You can download for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. So you can use that. But anyway, you can also use your preferred code editor. You can use Sublime, you can use Atom. But yeah, for the purpose of this video tutorial, I'm going to use Visual Studio Code. So for the layout of our project, PHP project, so I have created the directory PHP REST. That will be the name of our project, and then it is created on the root directory of our server. So PHP REST, and under here we will just create few directory for our files. So includes, and then we also have not under includes. Delete this. I need to delete this. Okay. Core. So in core we will be creating few files. I'll be creating the initialize.php. So basically the purpose of this file is to initialize all our settings in our project. And then of course in include we will create also another file which is config.php. So config.php will contain our database connection for our project. And before we continue with our tutorial, let's go ahead and try to see a real world example of REST API. So as you can see, we are in the GitHub developer page, and we can see here different options and different information on how to implement a certain API. So basically, we can see here the different methods also that we have talked from the previous video, and we can see here the endpoint. So this is basically the root endpoint of the API of github.com. So we can issue GET request to the root endpoint to get the all endpoint categories that the REST API version 3 supports. So we can use curl https://api.github.com, and here we can also see the HTTP redirects. Okay, so we have status code 301, 302. So basically, we can implement this type of redirects into our own PHP REST API. And also, we talk about HTTP verse before or methods, right? So we have head, the get, and then post. We have patch. We have also put and delete. Okay. And then we also have different options here, like the pagination. Okay, so if you have like thousands of records, or thousands of records, and then we don't want our user to be overwhelmed with information or overwhelmed with data, so we might want to paginate the data in our database by using some sort of like a parameter. So page, like page 2, and then every page consists of 100 records. So we can do that with our own PHP REST API. So I'm just showing you here all the possibilities that we can add into our PHP REST API. Okay, we also have this like link header. So if we want that, we can also implement that into our PHP REST API. And then we can also have like limiting to our request every day to our API. So here, as you can see, they have like 5,000 requests per hour limit. So yeah, we can also do that if we want to limit the access to our API. So now let's go back to our code editor and try to complete and start the project and actually write some code to implement our own API in PHP. So this is our base project, PHP REST, and as you can see, we have two more directories, the core and includes. The core has the initialize.php file, and also includes has config.php. So in config.php, we're going to add the settings and we'll try to connect to our database. So let's try to do that here. So there are a couple of things that we need. We're going to define the user. This is for our database user. And we also have to define the password for that. Okay, and also we need to define first our database name. So maybe we'll just try to name it as PHP REST, and we can try to indent this just to make it more readable. Okay, and then here we're just going to define another variable db, and then new. This will be the actual connection for our database, and in here we need to add MySQL, and then the host is, we can say 127.0.0.1, and then the database name will be, of course, equals to our defined database name. So that's db_name, And of course, another one for our character set. So char set equals UTF-8, and we're going to supply also the user or DB user, and of course our DB password. Okay, so that's the connection for our database. And then we're going to set some attributes here. DB attributes. So DB set attribute, and then let's say PDO colon, and then at attr emulate repairs. We'll just set it to false, and we can copy this. Set attribute, and this will be MySQL attr use buffered query. Okay, so this will be for setting up our database connection, and this will make the database connection later on to be faster than a normal database connection. So attr error mode will be PDO, and then error mode is exception. Okay, and then I think that's it for our database connection. So we have set the database attributes, we have set the connection, and we can use this class, or I mean this particular config.php file to actually connect to our database. And then we're just going to use this in all our files later on when we try to have get all the data coming from our database. And actually in our config.php we can try to define some constant here. So for example, define, that's define, and then so for example app name, we'll just say PHP REST API tutorial. Okay, and then in our initialize.php we can we can use this config.php file and try to connect to our database. So in here, in initialize.php, we're just going to define some constant here. So we're just going to check first if ds, this is for our directory separator. So ds, so we're just checking if the ds or directory separator is defined. So if it is defined, so we're just going to do nothing. Or if it is not defined, let's just go ahead and define it by saying ds and directory separator. Okay, and then semicolon, and then let's try to define also site root for our project. So the same thing, we're going to check if the site root is defined. If it is already defined, then let's just say null, and if it is not, then define it by just using site root or site underscore root here, and then ds, so ds, and then the directory of our file or our project. So in my case, I'm using WAMP, and after that one, another directory separator, and then the www folder that will host our files, and then another directory separator, and the name of our project, which is PHP REST. Okay, so we have defined our site root, and then we supplied the directory that are or the directory of our project. So now let's just define the include path for our files. So let's define, and then inc, and then path. So it will just load all the necessary files in our include folders. Okay, so inc path, and then we need to bring in the site root. Okay, and then the directory separator, and of course the folder includes. Okay, so basically we're just saying here that we want to go, or we want to define the include path as the site root, which is WAMP 64, and then www, and then PHP REST, and of course the includes directory, which is we have created the config.php file. Okay, and of course we also need to do the same with our core directory. Okay, so basically we're just defining here different directories in our project, so it will make more sense later on when we try to include all these files or all the files in, under these directories. So core path, and then it should be, instead of using include, it should be core. Okay, so since we have these lines already, we can just load the config file first. So to do that, we need to require once, okay, by using the constant inc path that we have defined above, and then the directory separator, and then the file or the actual file for our config, which is config.php. Okay, and of course we can also include the core classes here. So let us say require once, and then the core path, which is our constant, and then directory separator, and of course, say for example we have session or any other classes from our core directory. So say for example we will create another one here, say post.php. Okay, so in our initialize.php, we'll just say core path, and then directory separator, and of course the post.php. Okay, so after that, we need to go to our post.php file and configure the actual content of our post. So basically, we're just going to create a class here. So PHP and class post, and in here we need to add the database stuff here. So that will be private, and then the connection, and we also have private and table, which will be post. Okay, and then of course we need to add also the post properties. So that will be public ID, public category ID, public category name, public title of our post, and body of our post, and the author of our post, and also the date that the post has been created. So there you go. And of course we need to initialize this class or particular class by using the constructor with the DB connection. Okay, so that will be public function and then construct, and of course we need to supply the database connection here, and we need to set the connection or the attribute of this particular class connection to the database connection that we have supplied in our construct method or function. Okay, so here you go. And below this construct method, we need to have the function to actually read the record from our database. So public function and read. Okay, so this is for getting the post from our database, and in here we need to create the actual query of our read function. So that will be query, and then the select statement. Okay, so we're just going to have this formatted so it is easy to read. So select, and then C that name as category name, and P that ID. This is for between category name or the category and of course the post. So P that category ID, yeah, and post title, post body, and of course the post author or author of our post, and the date. Okay, and in here we need to specify the table, which are the table, yeah, this table, which is we have initialized it into post, and then the name, which is P, or the alias of our table is P, and then left join categories. So this will involve two tables, the post and categories. So alias of categories is C, and on P that category ID equals c dot id, and then we need to have this ordered by p dot created at, it should be created at descending to actually get the latest post. And we need to close this here. Okay, and in here we need to prepare the statement. Prepare statement. Okay, and that's STMT, and then using the connection that we have, and of course prepare method and the actual query of our post, and execute query by calling STMT and then using the execute function. Okay, and then we're just going to return the STMT for now, or the statement. Okay, so save this, and then we also need to add another file or another directory here. So no, not there. Another directory for our API. So in our API, we need to have the read.php file. Okay, so let's open up our PHP tag in here, and since it is a PHP REST API, we're going to allow HTTP request here. So we're going to add headers here. So that will be header, and then inside we need to define access control, and then allow origin, and then colon, and then of course the asterisk, which means we're just allowing anyone without the problem with authentication or OAuth or something like that. And then also we need to specify the content type here. So that's content, and then type, colon. So this will be, the MIME type is application/JSON format. Okay, so in here we need to include the initialize PHP file. So that's our read.php file is inside the API directory. So we need to back or up one directory. So that's period, and then slash, and of course our initialize core, and then initialize that PHP. So what we're doing is that we're just calling the initialize.php file, which contains all the constant that we have defined, the directory separator, the site root, the include path, and the core path. And of course it will load the config file, so which is our database connection. So we already have the DB connection here, so we can just use it in our read.php file. So this is initializing our API. So as I've said, this include the config of our database, the connection, and also all the files that we have initialized in our initialize.php. So for example, the post, we require once the post.php file, which is the class post, that includes all the necessary properties for this particular class. So in here we need to instantiate the post class. So that will be instantiate post. So will be post, and then new post, and then of course because we specify that our construct function takes in a DB connection. So that will be post equals new post, and then of course our DB connection. So if you're wondering where is this DB connection or this DB variable, it is in our config.php file. So as you can see here, we have defined the DB or the database connection. So next is to query the actual blog post. So blog post query. So we're going to do that by using the post object and then by using the read function. So the read function, we have defined it in our post.php file, which is our class post. So read, and then of course we're going to get the row count. So that will be num, and then result, and then row count. And we're going to check if num is greater than 0. So that will be post array, or array, and then we're just going to initialize it as an empty array. So post r, and then we're going to have this data equals array. Okay, and then we're just going to add the else statement here, and in here we're just going to iterate the row equals the result, and then we're going to fetch the PDO associative array. So fetch assoc, and then curly braces, and then we're just going to say here extract the row. Okay, so in here we're going to say post item equals array, and then inside this particular array we're going to define the attributes that we want to return for this particular post. So ID, and then the title of our post. So title. Okay, and then body of our post also. So HTML entity decode the body of our post, and then of course the author of the post. Okay, author, and also the category ID. Okay, so category ID, and the last one will be the category name. So category underscore name, and category underscore name. And of course after that one, we have, instead of using the comma, we use the semicolon. So there you go. So in here, after the iteration, or before the iteration closes, we need to push the data into our array. So array push the array, which is post array, and then data, and of course we're going to push the post item. And then after that one, after the iteration of the records, we're just going to push to data. Okay, so, or I mean, we're trying to convert to JSON and then output. So echo, and then we're going to use the PHP function JSON underscore encode, and our post array. There you go. And if the number or the number of count or the number of result is less than 0, so we just need also to define a message here. So that will be echo and then JSON encode and message is, we just set this to no post found. Okay, echo JSON, and we need to add semicolon at the end of the line. So echo JSON, of course we need also to define that it should be inside the array. Okay, so there you go. And in this part right here, we're going to create our database and add the tables and of course the records that we're going to read from our API. So let's go to our PHP MyAdmin, and in here let's just create a new database. That will be PHP REST. Okay, as you can remember, that's the name of our database that we have defined in our config.php file. And also we're going to add here a table or a couple of tables here, so categories, and there will be 3 columns or 3 attributes for this particular table. So that will be ID, and the length is 11 auto increment, and there will be name and varchar, which is 255 is the length, and created at, and this should be a date time. Where is it? Date time. And yeah, I think that's it, and then save. So we have now a table categories, and also we need to add a post table. So that will be post and ID, length is 11, auto increment, and of course we have the category ID. So this will be int 11, and then we have title, so varchar 255, and the body also will be text, and then we add 2 more for our author of our post, which will be varchar 255 also, and of course the created at, and this will be a date time. There you go, and then save. So we now have 2 tables in our database. So in categories, we need to insert some values here. So the first one will be technology, and then created at, will be the date today, so that will be 31, and the hour is 10. Okay, so the second one will be gaming, and the date the same, and the hour is 10. Okay, so go, and let's just add another categories of our post. So auto, and then the date. If you want, I can place, or I can add the database in the description. You can just download it and import it in your PHP MyAdmin. So it will save you a lot of time instead of making all this unnecessary part of creating the database. Okay, so you always have the option to download the database coming from the description of this particular video. So I took the liberty of just populating the post table here. So you can go ahead and try to download the MySQL file in the description box below to save you some time of adding all this unnecessary, or adding all this records to our database. So let's go back to our code editor and let's try to check our project for the last time before we test it in our Postman software. So we have here the read.php file, and we have the headers, and we initialize our API by using the initialize.php file. And of course, this initialize.php file include all the core files of our project. And here we have instantiated the post, okay, and passing in the database connection. And of course, in here we have iterated the records coming from our database and displaying it or converting it to JSON format. So now let's try to test this on our Postman software. So let's go ahead and search for Postman. And by the way, guys, this is the software that we're going to use to test our PHP API. And if you have work in the future that involves API, you can use Postman to configure your request. So this is the Postman Postman software that we're going to use. This is good for testing an API. So let's just try to navigate to our project. So localhost PHP REST, and then I think we're using PHP REST and of course API, and then our read.php. So PHP REST API and then read.php, and then make sure that it is the method that we're using is get, and then try to send it to our PHP API. So we have here the I think we have some error here. So let's try to read it in our So we have an error in our SQL syntax. Check the manual, and I think we don't have space here. So let's try to do that. Navigate to our post.php on line 39. So post.php in line 39. So where is it? Ordered by. Oh, so I think we have misspelled our ordered by. Instead of using ordered, it should be order by. Okay, so save this and let's go back to Postman and send our request. So we have a new error column not found, P created in order clause. So that's easy because created at should be created at. So there you go. Send, and we have now the result of our PHP REST API reading, and under data we can see all the records coming from our database. So as you can see, the result of our request is on JSON format. Okay, so now that we have read.php to get all the information or to get all the records from our database, so what we want next is to create another read for a single record from our database. So for example, we want to specify a certain ID of a post, and then we should be able to get all the information associated by that particular ID. So let's go back to our code editor, and in our post.php file, so right below the public function read, and make sure you're still under or inside the post class. So in here, I'm just going to add another function. So public and then function read underscore single. So this will be just getting a single post from our database. So as for the query, so we're just going to we're going to use almost the same query, and then we're just going to change something here. Instead of using order by, so we should remove this because we're only getting a single post, so there's no point of ordering it by the ID or created attribute. And of course we want to get a single post, so we need to specify that it should be a particular ID, and of course we need to limit the return of this query into 1 because yes, we only want to have a single post to be returned. And in here we need to prepare also the statement for this particular function. So that's prepare statement, and in our statement here below we need to get the actual data coming from our database. So statement, and then fetch, and then PDO fetch associative array. So, and then below here we need to set the properties of our post. So this title will be our row, and then of course the return title from our query. And then we're going to copy this 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, it should be for our body. This one is our author. Okay, and then we also have the category ID, category underscore ID. So copy and paste it here, and then category name, category name. Okay, so there you go. And we need to bind a parameter for this particular statement here. So where post ID equals, so instead of executing it directly, we need to bind a param. So that's bind parameter, and then we're just going to specify the first one, and ID should be the post ID. Okay, and of course this is binding the param, right? And the next one is execute the query. So that's stmt and then execute. Okay, so stmt execute, and then row stmt fetch PDO fetch assoc or associative array. So I think that's it for our public function read underscore single. And under our API, let's just create a new file here. So that's new file, and then read single.php. What happened there? So read single.php, and then we're just going to copy here the read.php file, and we're just going to delete the content of this below, only the header. So we're just going to use the same headers, access control, and of course the content type. Then we initialize our file, and then instantiate a post, object, and we need to assign the post ID. So that's post, and then ID equals, we're just checking if the get ID is set. So return the get ID, otherwise exit or die. And then post read single. So that's the function that we have defined in our read.php file. And of course we want to create an array of our values. So that will be post, just like what we have in our read.php. So array, and then of course we need to specify also the ID. Okay, so post ID, we're just going to copy this, 6, title of our post, the body of our post, and of course the author of the post, category ID, okay, and then category name. So we're just going to copy this title for this, and so this one, and also this one, and also this one, and so with this one. And we need to make a JSON, okay, and print R, and of course JSON encode the post array. So post array. So I think that's it, and we can use this in our Postman software. So let's go ahead and let's try that. So I'm just going to copy this and create a new request. So this should be API, and then read_single.php, and then specify the ID. So for example, ID 3. Okay. So we have an error. So let's try to. So we have an error here because we misspelled the fetch. So post fetch. Okay. So let's go back to Postman and send. Category name ID. Define property post. Single. Category name ID. Okay. Save, and again. So that's it. We now have the post 3 with all the information coming from our database. So if we try to go with another one, ID 2, so we can get all the information associated with ID number 2. And in this video, guys, we're going to discuss how to create or implement a create record into our PHP REST API project. So as a sort of review, guys, in the previous video, we also have implemented the reading of single record coming from our database. So we have laid out the function read_single, and of course we created a file read single.php, and then we're querying the record by using its ID, and of course returning all the data related to that particular ID. And now let's continue working on with our post.php file, and just below the read_single function, we're going to create another function here. So the name of this particular function will be public function and then create. Okay, so in this particular function, we're going to add some lines in order for us to create create a record by using our API project. So for us to do that, let's go ahead and build first our query. So here we need to create our query. Okay, and that will be query, and of course the actual query of our function, which will be insert, because we're trying to create a record into our database. And of course we'll just concatenate our table name here, so this, and then the table of this particular class. So I think it's, yeah, table. Okay, the attribute table. And right after that is another string, set title equals placeholder title. Okay, and then body equals the placeholder of the body of our post. Okay, another one for our author, and the placeholder for our author, and then of course the category ID. So category ID, and then the placeholder for our category ID. Okay, so, and then we need to prepare our statement here below. So prepare statement, so that will be stmt, and then using the connection that we have, so that will be connection, and then prepare, and of course the query. Okay, and then we need to clean the data next, because the information that will be saved into our database is coming from the user, or the input of the user, or the request coming from the user. So that's why we need to clean the data. Clean data. So for our title, we need to set the title equals to HTML special chars. Okay, and then strip tags. Okay, and then this, that, or this, and then the attribute title. Okay, so this line, it only means that we just want to remove all the unwanted problems with our data. So this will be for our body. Okay, this will be for the author. Okay, and of course this will be for our category ID. Okay, there you go. So we just want to make sure that it will be the same also for this particular part. So category underscore ID, and yes, we just need to make sure to indent this, or to align this, to make our code readable. Okay, and then right after that one, we need to bind the parameter, or the params, for our placeholder for title, body, author, and category ID. So this part right here will be binding of parameters. Okay, so stmt, and then bind param, specifying the placeholder of our title, and then the actual value of our title. So there you go, and then we'll just copy this one for the other attributes as well, for our category ID, for our author, and of course for our body, or body of the post. And of course we need to change also the placeholder for this, and so with this category ID. Okay, So after that one, we need to execute the query, of course, after binding all the params, cleaning the data. So the last part will be executing or execute the query. So all we have to do is call the stmt and then execute. Okay, and then if the execution of this particular query is successful, then all we have to do is return true. Okay, otherwise we print an error here. Print error if something goes wrong. So that will be print f. Okay, print f, and then error will be %s. Okay, and the error of our statement or the query that we have, and then return false, something like that. Okay, so basically guys, we only prepared our public function or public function create, and this will be used for our files, especially in our API. So under our API directory, we need to create another file. So that will be create. So let's go ahead and create a new file, and then new file, and then we need to say here create.php. So in our create.php, guys, we just want to add some headers also, the same with our the read.php. Okay, so we might as well copy all this code right here and then paste it here, and then we just need to remove. Okay, starting from here, and then guys, as I've said, we need to add some other header. We need to add some other headers here. So we have access control, allow origin, and we have content type. So another one header is access control, and then allow methods. Okay, so this is save or create query, or we need to create a record to our database. So this will be a post method, meaning the request should have data for us to save into our database. And then we also have to add another header here. So this will be access, and then control, and then allow headers. So basically we're just specifying here what are the headers that are needed. So that will be this one. We just need to duplicate this. Okay, and content type also. Okay, another thing is the access control allow methods. Okay, and also the authorization. Okay, so basically we're not going to touch authorization in this particular series, but for the sake of this tutorial, we're going to add authorization there. So maybe in the future you want to implement authorization for your PHP API. And the last one will be the X requested with. Okay, so these are all the headers that are required or specified as the allowed headers. And in this video, guys, we're going to continue working with our create.php file, and at the end of this video we should be able to insert record into our database by using our PHP API. So let's go ahead and try to modify our create.php. So last time we just added the header and of course the function in our post.php. So we have here the create function, and we should be able to use that in our create.php file. So in here we have initialized our API by using our initialize.php. So basically in initialize.php we connected our project into our database. So the next step is to instantiate the post. So we have that here. So we instantiate the post by using the post class and of course applying the database connection. So after that we need to get the posted data. Okay, so of course the data should be coming from a request. Okay, so we need to decode that by using file get contents, and of course specify that it is a PHP / input. Okay, and then by that we can get the actual data. So post, we're going to set the title by getting the data and of course the attribute title. Okay, so copy and paste this for the other attributes as well. So we have the body, the author, and then we also have the category ID. So copy and paste. Okay, so after that we can just create the post, create post, and then we can use the function that we have defined in our post.php, which is the create. So in order for us to do that, let's add the post and then call the function create. So we're just checking if it is successful, or meaning the function return true. Okay, so if the function return true, then we're going to echo a message here, or meaning display a message. So JSON encode, and this is going to be an array. So specifying the message, which will be post created. Okay, and then of course if the return is not true, then we will return we will display another message. Okay, array, you can just copy and paste this. So the message will be post not created. Okay, so let's try this in our Postman software. So Postman, and this will help us to develop API. So if you're serious about working with API, so make sure to download and use Postman software. So in here we just need to add another tab. Okay, so instead of using the read underscore single, then we're going to add or change this into create.php, and of course it should be post because we're sending data into our API. And for the headers, let's just say content type. So as you can see, if we try to type in, we can have the options, and then we can see content. It should be content type, and it should be application/JSON. And of course in our body we can choose raw, and then we can specify here the data that we want to pass into our API. So we need title for that. So basically, we're just going to surround our values, the key and values, with double quote. So sample API post, and then comma, and then body, sample body of an API post from a request, and then we have another one for our author. So Brad Stevens, and third or the fourth one will be the category ID. Okay, category ID, and then we can say like there are, I think we have 4 categories right now, so basically we can choose from 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we'll just say 3, and we can send this, try, and see if our API works. So we have an error here. We have an error in our SQL syntax. So this is post.php on line 81. So this is probably the query. So post.php, and then we have the actual query here at the top. So I think this one made the error. So save that, and let's try to test it by sending another request. So now we have field created at doesn't have a default value. That's because we need to edit the attribute of our post table. So as you can see here, we have the different attributes: category ID, title, body, and author, and created at. So let's go to structure, and now the created at date time doesn't have a default value, so we're going to change that, and the default will be the current timestamp. Okay, and then save, and let's go back to our Postman API, Postman software, and send another request to test our API. So sending request, and we have the response, which says message that the post has been created. Okay, so in order for us to test that, there are other ways for us to test this. So we can just read all the records. So send, and there you go. We have here the data that has been added recently. So the ID is 5, and the sample, the title is sample API post, which we have specified here. So sample API post, and then we also have the body. So sample body of an API post from a request. Okay, the same, and of course the author is Brad Stevens. The category ID is 3. Okay, that's what we have specified also here, and the category name is auto. So I think that concludes our create.php or create function or create feature, and we have successfully added that into our API. So the next step is to create or add the feature for updating the records. And in this video, guys, we're going to discuss the update. So basically, we're just going to add the update function or feature into our PHP RESTful API project. So we have here the create function, as you can see from our post.php file, and then we're going to copy the whole function because the idea of create and update is almost the same. So we're just going to copy all this included in this particular create function, and then right below that we can paste the update. So we're just going to name our function into update. Okay, so this is the update post function. Okay, and of course the query will be a bit different because we're updating a record now. So we'll just say update this table and set all the necessary attributes. So for example, the title, the body, the author, and of course the category ID. And since we're updating a record, we need to set the ID or like filter by ID because we don't want to update all the records. So for now, let's just say where ID equals, we can use the question mark, or we can also use the placeholder colon ID. And of course we can also do the cleaning of data of the ID. So instead of category ID, and also here we're just going to say ID, and then indent this to align with the other attributes. Okay, and then of course we need to bind the parameter. So we're using the ID as placeholder for our ID, and the value will be this and then ID, and then it should also execute the query and then return true if the query is successful. Otherwise, print the error message and of course return false. So in our project, we need to create another file for our API. So we have already create that PHP, also the read_single.php, and then read.php. So now we need to add another one for our update. So that will be update.php. And of course, as a sort of basis for this update.php, we can just copy all the lines of codes that we have added in our create.php and then paste it in our update.php, because as I've said, the logic behind or the theory behind the create and update is almost the same. Okay, so but instead of using post, it should be put. Okay, and then we also need to have the ID here. So post title and then the ID, because we're specifying the ID of the post or the record that we want to update. And of course, instead of using create, we should call the method update, and of course it should be post updated and post not updated. Okay, so I think that's all there is to it for this update.php file. So let's try that in our Postman software. So we have here the create.php, so we're going to use update.php and then specify the ID of the record that we want to update. So ID and then colon, and then let's try to see which post or record that we want to update. So we have added this sample API post by using our create.php file, right? Before or from the previous video. So the ID of this is 5. So let's just use that. So ID is 5. And then let's just say updated API post, sample body of an API, sample body of an updated API post from a request. So we have the same author, category ID, and also the ID that we're going to specify or update. And of course, because in our update.php, we specify that it should be a put method. So of course, we need to use that in our postman in order for us to properly update the data. Okay, so send, and let's try that. And the record or the response says that the post has been updated. So let's try to read all the data. So as you can see here, we have updated the title, and of course we have updated the body of our post. So as you can see, the update function or the update feature of our PHP REST or the PHP API that we are developing is working. So the next step is to create another one or another feature. We will be adding another feature into our PHP REST API. So basically, we all have the reading of all the data, reading of a single data or single record, and then also we have creating a record and also the updates. So the last one will be the delete of a certain record. Okay, so basically the same idea. We will be adding the function here for our delete. So that will be delete or public function delete. It should be an easy function right here. So right below the update function, we will have to add the delete function. So that's public function and then delete. Okay, and we just need to create the query here. So that will be query, and then of course delete from, and then this table, and of course where ID, we need to specify the ID of the record that we want to delete, and then we need to say we are preparing the statement, prepare statement. So stmt, and using the connection, prepare, so query, and of course we need to clean the data. So we can just copy the this particular line. So clean data, and yeah, ID, and of course we need to bind the parameter. So stmt, and then bind parameter, specify the ID, and of course the actual value, and we're going to execute the query. The same thing here, so just like that. So basically we're just returning true if the statement has been successful. Otherwise we need to print the error and return false. So public function delete, and we have set up the query to delete the record from our database. We have prepared the statement, and then we also have the mechanism to clean the data. So as you can see, and then this part right here is binding the ID parameter to our query, and this part is to execute the actual query. And if there's an error, so we should be printing or the error here. And guys, the next step is to create another file here under our API. So new file, and then this should be delete.php. Okay, And in here, we're going to add some logic and add some lines. And I think we could just copy what we have in our update.php. And as you can see here, we have the code or lines of code for our update. So let's go ahead and copy all this and paste it in our delete.php file. So in here, we're going to change a couple of things. So for example, the allow methods. So instead of using put, it should be delete right there. And of course, initializing our API by using the initialize.php, instantiate the post class by using this particular line, and supplying the database connection that we have configured with our initialize.php. And then of course, we're getting the data that has been posted by the user or by the request. So as you can see, we are getting the data by using the code and file get contents and PHP input. So I think other information, like just like the category ID, the author, and the body, and of course the title, is not needed here because we're only concerned with the ID that has been passed by the user or the request itself. So we're setting the attribute ID by getting the data ID, just like that. And as you can see, we have created the delete function. So we're just going to update our delete.php instead of using update function, because this is a feature for delete. It should be, of course, the delete function there. And change the message. So instead of updated, it should be post deleted. Okay. And of course, this one will be post not deleted. So I think that's all for this file delete.php. So we'll just save the post.php and of course the delete.php. So we'll try real quick this particular feature with our Postman API. So let's go ahead and open up our Postman software and try to check if our feature really works. As I've said, guys, from my previous videos, if you're working with an API and you're trying to get around or to be comfortable with an API, be familiar with how API works, so Postman software can really help you with all the activities that you want with an API. So basically, we have read.php, we have read single, we also have the update.php. So if you try to run or read.php, we should be able to get all the records coming from our database, as you can see here. And of course, we're dealing with delete. Maybe we could just create a certain record for now, or maybe we'll just delete a certain post, just like this one, ID equals to 5. So we'll try that. ID is 5. So we'll just copy this and then create a new tab here in our Postman software. Make sure that the method is delete, and of course the file that we want is the delete.php, and of course we're going to supply the ID of the record that we want to delete. And as you can see, we have the ID is 5. Okay, so we're just going to grab that and set the ID equals to 5 just to check if we can really delete the post with the ID 5. So send. So we have an error here. Let's trying to get property of a non-object. So line 17 of our delete.php. Line 17, post ID and data ID. So we're getting the ID from data ID, and as you can see, we're using PHP input. So instead of supplying directly the ID here, it should be declared in the body of the request. So let's try that. Localhost PHP. Yeah. Let's go to our body of our post and then raw. Okay. So in here we're going to supply the ID instead of directly setting the ID equals here. So this will be ID, and then of course the value, which is 5. So, okay, so send the request. So what happened? As you can see, we have here the message post deleted. So we should not be able to, or we won't be able to view or get the data that has the ID of 5. So try that. So as you can see, the record that has the ID of 5 is now gone. Okay, so basically we're just deleting the record by supplying the parameter in our request body. So I think that concludes our PHP REST API tutorial, and as you can see, we have fully functions, or we have now the full function of our PHP REST API. So we have the create, delete, read single, read.php, and of course the update. So if you want, because as you can see, there is also the category for our post. So we have the post and then the category of our post. So we could also create another file for our category to be able to have the read, update, the read single, and also the delete function for our categories. But I think it is pretty easy because the category has only 2 or 3 attributes: the ID, and then the name, and of course the created attribute. So you can, if you want, you can create it on your own. You can start by creating the read.php, update.php for this particular model, category.php. So I think for now, I'll just guide you for the single or read that function for our category.php. So we're going to create another class for this. So I'm just going to copy right here and then here. So where's our, there, category.php, and instead of using the post, it should be category. So this is for our category table. So we have constructor that takes in the DB connection and of course the read, and we need to close the category class right there. Okay, and instead of using the post table, we should be able to, or we should use the category table in our database. And of course, as I've said, there are only 3 properties for our category. So the ID, the name, and of course the created at. Okay, so I think this is categories instead of categories. There you go. And created that, and then we have constructor with DB parameter or the connection parameter. And in here, instead of having this join query, we can just create or query all the attributes from our table name categories, and we don't want, or we don't need this particular part right here. So select all from categories, and then we're executing the query. There you go. And in here in our API, we can just say read all categories .php, and of course we can just copy the code that we have here in our post.read.php. So that will be read all the categories, and instead of using post here, we should say category. Okay, and then passing the DB connection, and then reading, or what is the method. So I think we also use read, right? So read. Okay, and then we have the ID, the name, and of course I think we only have create at in our table, in our database, and you can just remove this, create at. Okay, and created at, it should be created at. So basically we can just delete all others, and we should be able to see our categories. Okay, so categories, no categories found if there is no record found for our categories. So let's do that and try that with our Postman API or Postman software. Okay, and try to check if we have a functional read for our categories. So here, new tab there. We can copy this and make sure it's another request API, and we have the file read all underscore categories, and then it should be get and then send. So we have an error, class category not found. Let's try that, because we haven't initialized our class category in our initialize.php. So let's do that with this line, category.php, and save that, and go back to Postman software and send. Undefined variable created at in all categories 26. That's because 26 created at, so it should be create at. Okay, and then send. So there you go. As you can see, we can now read the categories from our database. So guys, it's your turn now to make the other functions like the read, the update, reading of a single one, and of course deleting a single record from our database. So guys, that concludes our PHP REST API tutorial, and I hope you enjoyed this series. And if you're new here in our YouTube channel and you want content about programming, so I am inviting you to subscribe and press the notification bell, so you will get updated whenever we have a new upload regarding programming.